All righty, looks like we are up and live everywhere. Hold on, let me turn the music off. There we go. It's really hard talking and doing all the board work. You need to be the one that opens the show from now on.
Okay.
Of course, now you got to know when I'm doing everything, but this is why we need a producer. You need to be here, or I need to be there. We need a producer.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome everybody, by the way. I'm Dan. She's Lindsay. How is Lindsay doing? We haven't chatted much this week.
Lindsay is doing very well, all things considered. It's hot I live in Texas, y'all, so right now our weather is hell's front porch, which is slightly better than July, August, which is Satan's asshole.
Well, where I'm originally from, which is upstate New York, they're anticipating hitting 100 in the next couple of days. And here in southeast North Carolina, where I live now, it is absolutely freaking gorgeous. It's 80-something degrees, like 83. Sunny, beautiful. And the beach is calling my name in a little bit.
Hold on one second.
Oh, she's got to deal with her little, what she call them, crotch goblins. Oh, yeah. So welcome, everybody, to the show. I am Dan, and she's Lindsay, as we talked about. Boy Meets Squirrel is the name of the show. We are live every Wednesday from 4 to 5:30 Eastern. We talk about issues that men and boys face in today's society. And today I thought we would talk about, I just love watching her yell at her kid while we're here. For those of you watching on video. I thought we would talk, my man from Thailand. How you doing, buddy? By the way, I love your videos where you're reviewing all the electric cars in, was it Sweden, I think it was, and the trucks and all that. I'm jealous you get to drive them. So today I thought we would talk about a somewhat controversial issue. So I'm anticipating we will get reported in a matter of seconds. We might even beat last week's 2 minutes, where we had basically gotten to the point where we are now, where we're just introducing ourselves and what we do, and got reported. So far, so good, though. We're 2:26 in, so we're not going to set a new record, Lynn. Sorry. So you're muted. You got to unmute yourself there, darling.
Darn.
So we're going to be talking about men's mental health and the quote-unquote men's mental health crisis. Uh-oh. Lindsay, Jay sent it already. Hat must.
Yeehaw!
So every time you send us a hat and mustache on TikTok, Lindsay has to go yeehaw. That's a fun little thing. But I want to talk about the men's health crisis, and specifically, and this one blew my mind. So June is considered Men's Mental Health Month, Awareness Month in the U.S., but it's not in other parts of the world, and it is not even in some parts of the U.S. But the reality is, Jay's laughing at you, Lindsay.
Of course he is.
Boy, he's like your biggest fan. But the reality is, it is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. It was created in 1994. So we're on the 30th anniversary of it. And unfortunately, some people have tried to poo-poo it, saying it doesn't exist. If you're one of them, leave. There's no point in you being here. But what I thought might be fun is to kind of, well, I don't know if fun's the right word to use, but to try and talk about one. Is there one? Because I have a somewhat different viewpoint than many on that. Yes, there is one. Let me state that, but it's not what people think it is probably where I'm going to go with it. And two, what are the issues? That type of stuff. So for those of you that are all around the world, because we get people from all around the world, feel free to jump in the conversation. Share a little bit about yourself. We'd love to know where people are from. Because as I said, this is worldwide and it's kind of my jam, and I think Lindsay's also. Some good questions coming in already. We will get to them in a moment, but I want to give Lindsay a chance to talk since I've talked about 4 minutes now. Go.
Okay. Right. No. So, men's mental health is a big issue, and my take on that is that it is a lack of access to acceptable therapies that are geared towards men, because therapy has, unfortunately, like the live that I was in with Miss Lola and Mr. Eric earlier today, a lot of therapies have become very feminized. So there aren't a lot of resources out there for men. And though they're technically speaking, yes, on paper, there are just as many resources for men as women. But everyone knows that on paper and in practice are two entirely different things. So a woman walks into a therapist office and she gets an entirely different experience than the man who would walk into the same uh therapist office. In many cases, a woman will walk in and like, oh, you'll do self-reflection, self-searching. What can you do, to improve yourself? Um, Men in many cases get told you're the problem, especially when it comes to like couples therapies or marriage counseling. A couple will walk in. My husband and I used to go to marriage counseling. We don't anymore because the therapist was not interested in sharing the blame equally. Like I walked in knowing I'm not looking to be validated or told that I'm doing nothing wrong. What I'm looking for, my husband and I were looking for, is tools to help us navigate, compromise, and wade through our problems, work together. We weren't looking to cast blame because the one that we are using, the current methods, aren't working. So we wanted kind of an outside view because maybe it's one of those you can't see the forest through the trees, even though we're trying to look at it from the other person's view. But all this particular therapist was interested in doing is telling me that I'm right and validate and everything is Mr. Squirrel's fault. And I'm like, no, that's not why we came. And this guy looked and he was a male therapist.
I was just about to ask you, was it a male or female?
You would think that a male therapist would able to kind of be a little bit more even, but the sad reality is that a lot of them are taught biases. Like that's what's being taught.
Well, what is being taught in colleges now too.
In colleges now is biases. So
and that's not me saying that. That's other psychologists telling me that I've interviewed.
So from where I'm sitting and the feedback that I'm getting from guys is that it's not that there aren't therapies available. It's just that those that are available are not adequately geared towards guys. In other words, the therapists are expecting men to respond to things or think of things the same way women do. And I hate to break it to y'all, but men still aren't women and they still don't think like women. And y'all are going to respond to things differently. So that's my viewpoint on this.
Yeah, I mean, therapy is broken in my opinion. The therapists need therapists, if you will. And it's funny. I've talked to several therapists, interviewed a couple of them, and I'm not talking about for my personal issues, although some of you think I need to spend more time doing that. Having spoken with a couple of pretty big creators who are therapists, they're consistently saying the same thing. One, that with regard to men's mental health, one, they're seeing it increase. Two, men are even less likely to seek help now than ever. Their words, not mine. And therapy is not addressing them, right? And that's why they're not seeking help. So, like you mentioned, they're looking at, the one you saw was looking to put blame on somebody, probably your husband, that kind of thing, which wasn't what you were going there for. But a big issue, and the reason I asked was it a male or female, is that I forget the exact numbers, but somewhere around 70% of all or mental health professionals, to be more specific, are female. And under the age of 30, it's over 90 now. So when you realize that, and realize that women do think differently than men, and men think differently than women, one, there's not a lot of places that men can go and feel comfortable. And two, they're going to experience what you talked about if they do go. I mean, I can't tell you the number of guys that have told me they tried to go to a therapist and it was all about what did they do wrong. Not from the sense of, taking accountability or something, but take the blame, I think is the way you were kind of putting it. Mm-hmm. Black Dutch just sent a hat and mustache. So
Yeehaw!
I love when they do that. So, I think part of the problem is that therapy, the way it's construed now in general, I'm generalizing here, does not work for men, right? The way it's being conducted does not work for men. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I haven't been in a therapist's office since the late 90s. So I may be out of date on it. But last I knew, they were still using the standard stereotypical couch that you sat on. And they sat in a chair with their little yellow pad that you wanted to take and beat them over the head with. And that was, to my knowledge, that hasn't changed, right? And you're having a conversation face to face, which for men can feel very uncomfortable to begin with, right? Men are more active when they try and open up. We always talk about best way to get a guy to open up is go work on a car engine, right? And just kind of do your thing for a while and then say, hey, what about blah, blah, blah. Therapy is not there right now. And if anything, it's getting worse, I think. This is my opinion. People may disagree. And if you do, throw it up in the comments.
I think that we are seeing a slow shift in perspective, but I think it's going to be too little too late. At this point, we're trying to put a Band-Aid on a broken arm. I mean, yeah, it might alleviate or try and, like, if you need an amputation or something, but they're giving you Tylenol, it'll help, but it's not going to, what I can't talk today. I only had 1 cup of coffee today, y'all, so sorry. I'm apologizing now. What needs to happen is they need to dismantle the system completely and build it up from the bottom with, like, understanding to both sides, not try and, for lack of a better word, add an addition on, which is amusing because Dan just had an addition put on, but
Yeah,
but
I need to see a therapist after all that.
Therapy, the way it was intended or the way it is built now, was always sort of geared towards women, and then they decided, oh well, men need it too, but they tried to add on to the existing model without building a adequate foundation. So in many cases, the house is starting to tilt, or trying to build like a house on shifting sand. There's no support for the men's side, not really. So it's gonna fall apart. The whole house of cards is gonna fall apart if you don't have a good foundation. So we also need to recognize, like Dan said, that therapy isn't a one size fits all.
Yeah.
When a lot of times when women say go to therapy, they have a specific image in their mind of what that looks like. But therapy for different people, men and women, may look differently. Like my therapy, I don't do the sit there and talk about your feelings for hours. I just don't. Like the last time I went in and someone said, what's going on? I said, I'm not happy. And they go, and I explain why. And then after I did the 30-minute explanation, which I felt was perfectly adequate, they go, let's explore that. And I'm like, what part of that didn't you understand?
Oh God, I hate when they do that.
It's like the English teacher goes, why is the door red? It's because of the inner angst of the door is red because the author needed a color word and the cup next to the keyboard was red. That's why the cup is red. And that's how I know that therapy has been feminized, because so much of it is basically adding extra crap. Subtext, extra content. They said this, but what they really mean is this, but that's not what they said.
Right. And men don't think that way.
And men don't think that way anyway. And in many cases, many women don't, especially neurodivergent women don't do that. What we say is what we say. We don't need that extra crap.
Present company included, right?
Present company included. So like my version of therapy is writing fan fiction or sewing historical costumes or this. I do this for my mental health. Sorry, y'all. You're my outlet. Explains a lot, though, doesn't it?
You brought up some interesting points. I'm going to throw it out to the audience that's listening. As a guy, do you feel comfortable going to a female therapist? Now, I don't think it's right or wrong. I'm just, in general, do you think men feel safe going to a female therapist. I would argue right now, no, they don't. For the reasons Lindsay just talked about, right? One, there's the bias that exists. It's drilled into them, by the way, in school, right? Through the classes that they take, depending on how far they're going, whether it's to get the master's or to go all the way to PhD, right, which is a doctor. Whether they're a psychologist, just a general counselor, whatever, it's drilled into their brains to view it from the feminine standpoint, right? And to the point, and this is one of the reasons that what they were saying to me, that's why men aren't going into the profession anymore. Because any man that goes into it, goes into college interested in becoming, let's say, a psychologist, is bombarded with the feminization of it. And it turns them off, and then they change their major and become an accountant or whatever. So it's creating this crisis of lack of skilled therapists for men, especially male ones. And that's part of the problem that's triggering the men's mental health crisis. That was their argument. And I think there's a lot of validity to that. Myself, way back when I sought out therapy, again, this is in the 90s, so I'm way out of date. It did not work for me. I experienced the same thing that you talked about, Lindsay. Find a reason to blame me for it, and not in a healthy way, right? There's times that a therapist's job is to hold you accountable and make you see yourself as accountable. I'm not talking about that. It was it's all your fault. It was my fault. My mother abused me. I was 8 years old, dude. What the you talking about? And I saw several trying, because I saw a couple people had mentioned that they went searching through different therapists. And yes, you need to do that. I agree completely. I went through a half dozen, never found one that I could connect with, that I felt comfortable enough with. But having said that, back in the day, to me, it did not matter. This is 20 something years ago, whether they were male or female. I wonder if that has changed now. My guess is it has. So if you're seeing a therapist or are thinking about it, as a guy, do you think man or woman is better? I'm curious. So jump in the messages. What do you think, Lindsay?
So, as far as therapy is concerned, it is the opposite of what I think for doctors. And this isn't my interesting take, is
Okay.
that I would actually rather, well, in my own case, if I could get a male therapist, I would almost rather go to a male therapist than a female therapist, because in my experience, a female therapist is more likely to try and help me blame everyone but me. In other words, avoidance of social account, like
Okay.
a personal accountability. Well, you did this and you're reactive, and no, I haven't been to many myself recently, but I unfortunately know quite a few. It seems to be a rising career choice. And listening to some of them talk in places that I can't avoid them, like doctors' offices and whatnot, where I'm sitting in the corner and everyone kind of forgets I'm there, you would be amazed at what you could learn just by listening.
Mm-hmm.
The way that they talk about, their stuff, or if they're in a group or a family, friends of family, where I can't, it's not acceptable to tell my sister's-in-law's best friend to shut up. Stuff like that. They always want to make it, well, you're reactive. There's a reason that you're behaving this way. Yes, sometimes the reason is you. The reason is you. You have something wrong with you, and you need to fix it, because otherwise you're going to continue to repeat the same behaviors in other relationships with other people. It's like Taylor Swift. If all of your relationships all end the same way, what's the common denominator? You. It might be you're the problem. And the fact that you're not looking for this, they're not going to actually take you look inward. It's their first reaction is always look outside to see what you're reacting to, which on the surface level might be, well, why did you react this way to this? It's a valid concern, but there's usually an underlying deeper thing. Like, in other words, female therapists treat the symptoms, they don't treat the actual underlying cause. There is, however, a difference I've noticed between a
Interesting.
therapist and a psychologist. A psychologist will usually dive down deep, male or female, to try and find the root
Oh,
cause.
right.
A therapist is usually for the surface level, and I have the same problem with doctors. I have female doctors who, without fail, will ask me two questions: might I be pregnant, and when was my last menstrual cycle? And whenever I say there's something wrong, they tell me you need to lose weight. I'm like, how's that helpful? Or they blame everything on my hormones. And I just wanted to look and go, is your attitude the fault of your hormones? Because that's not helpful. Um,
I could just see your face when I wish I was sitting there one time. Because yeah,
I was told once by a doctor that I went to see for something else that you need to lose weight. I looked down at her and go, I am 6 months pregnant. That is not advisable. And she was like, oh.
oh,
Like you could tell that she was just reading off a script, and then I said that, and she's like, oh. I'm like, yeah, no, you're gonna do your job, right? Just
they are amazing. Something like Ryan just said. I still remember a female therapist that wanted to talk about male privilege and how I confront it. I have heard that from many guys who
so
have
high.
gone to therapy recently. That is appalling to me, right? That speaks to what they're being taught in college and, depending on the level they're at, they're, whatever. That should never even be a discussion unless you're dealing with something specific to that. Most of the time you're going into, you're depressed or you're having marital trouble or whatever. Male privilege, really? You're going to talk about the patriarchy in the therapy? That's, again, to Ryo's point, this is what I'm hearing from guys, and it's why they aren't going to therapy, because of that exact situation. Mind-boggling to me.
I have only ever heard in one instance where privilege was brought up correctly, and that was a friend of a friend who had a very privileged upbringing, and then I believe they were cut off, and they were having all these issues, and they were unhappy, and it all stemmed from the fact that they didn't have a real grasp on reality because of the way they were raised. They were raised with a silver spoon in their mouth. Their parents did everything for them, and then they're expected to, like, helicopter parents, but with money. The worst. So the therapist correctly diagnosed them and said, look, you had a very privileged upbringing, and your privilege is blinding you to the fact that you're the problem. Because everything was always someone else's fault. Now that is an acceptable reason. But that's different.
Patriarchy, right? In this case, they're talking about,
Well, yeah, I realize that, but it made me think of that privilege can absolutely be a underlying cause, and in many cases, I think that women have. Well, not many cases. Women do have an incredible amount of privilege. We are the most privileged class. Western women are the most privileged group of people in the entire history of everyone. And with that comes a great deal of blindness towards things like the men's mental health crisis, because it doesn't affect us unless we have a male in our life that is currently going through it. If we don't see it right in front of our face, we don't care about it. So we tend to dismiss it, because I see a lot of women dismissing it, saying, well, men just don't seek therapy, or men just don't do that. I'm like, have you asked? Have you looked? Well, no, I just know. By osmosis? How do you just know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is, like, women will throw that out. Well, have you sought therapy? Because they see it as the be all end all for themselves. But that's because therapy is geared towards them. Telling a man to go seek therapy where he's going to be told that you're the problem because you're a male and you need to check your male privilege solves nothing. It creates more issues, right? And that's why I was asking, do men feel comfortable going to female therapists? Because that was the exact reason why I asked the question, right? Because I'm hearing that more and more. And I can't say that it's 100% it's a female therapist saying it. There have been male ones that have, they saw a male therapist that was doing that. But the majority of the time it is female, because most therapists now are female. And that's why I gotta believe, and I'm guessing, and I'm looking for feedback from the audience. that this is one of the biggest reasons why men don't go to therapy. And then, like, some other people have made comments, great comments, by the way, talking about they prefer a female because, and I'm going to paraphrase it, they seem more empathetic than the male ones. I think that might be a fair point also. So, women react emotionally, men react logically. In therapy, it might be better to see someone who's more able to handle the emotional side. I don't know. Again, I'm way out of date on it. I don't need therapy now. I did way back when. It did not work for me.
I also think it depends on, in a perfect world where we had male and female therapists who did not allow social biases to infiltrate their work. It might be beneficial to go see a male or female therapist depending on what issue you have. If a male needs someone who's more empathetic, that's great. Or if a female needs maybe less empathy, maybe a logical, because she's stuck in the rat maze that is her own mind, someone who goes, look, you're doing it wrong. This is the easy way out. That might be beneficial in a perfect world, which would be wonderful if we could get there. So I can see we have Bill and Jesse over on YouTube.
Oh yeah, we got tons of people. This is like, I'm having a ball reading some of the comments. And we're going to get to the comments, guys. Like Jacked Up just said, his therapist is an advocate for men. She specifically prefers men patients. I've also heard that. I want to be fair with that, right? There are some really good female therapists out there that are like Lindsay. They get it, right? And they get that beating up a man because he's a man is not helping them with whatever they need help with. The thing that really bothers me about it all is that, like Ryu said, there are therapists out there saying things like this, and they may not overtly say it too, right? They can do it behind the scenes or subtly. Remember, they're trained in how to work with the human mind. That can be good. It can be very, very evil. And I wonder if, one, are some women like that manipulating men because they can, and two, where does that lead us down the road, right?
And you have to also remember that therapists, just like anything else, is a profession. So there are going to be many people that are in it just for the paycheck rather than because it's a calling. You always hear nursing is my calling. Well, it also pays your bills. So, I mean, take that with a grain of salt. Not every nurse is Florence Nightingale. But like the live that I did this morning with Lola, we talked about this. And a lot of the therapists that are tied to court, so the family court system uses therapists all the time.
Yeah.
They're getting a paycheck regardless of what their diagnosis is. So if they are getting a paycheck regardless, the chances of them being a good, like, caring, it's like the people who pave our roads with horrible potholes. They're getting paid regardless of if they do a good job or a bad job. So why would they do a good job? Now, some people are going to have integrity and they're going to do a good job regardless, but those people seem to be far and few in between. Also, the people who really wanted to be therapists probably didn't imagine being attached to family court. So you probably got the bottom of the barrel there as well. So you can look on the therapists, usually websites or credentials, and look at what kind of other cases they're taking. And there's some red flags that you can look for when you're searching for one. If one of them, in many cases, I was talking to my friend who's having the horrible, terrible, no good time with custody court. His Voldemort, his ex, wants him to go see a family therapist, and the family therapist that they found for him lists their pronouns in his bio, and they're not normal he, she, her pronouns. And normally I wouldn't say that's an issue, except in this case, he's got a child who is being pushed through the medical system by a mother who I'm pretty sure has got Mouchisms by proxy. So this would be a therapist that she has chosen specifically for validation to what she's already. So she's looking for validation with that therapist. She's not looking for any
She's not looking to help her kid.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
not looking to help her kid. She's looking for validation. And he's like, no, I'm not paying for this. And because he has the final say in this particular area per the court, he gets to say no. But and that's another thing that is unfortunately contributing to the men's mental health crisis is in many cases women will use therapists. They will weaponize therapy against men, particularly in the arena of like couples or marriage counseling. They'll pick a therapist specifically because they know that therapist is going to back them up and tell the man, it's all your fault, you're doing everything wrong, how dare you. And that's not the purpose of therapy. So that's another way in which the whole system has been corrupted from its original purpose, which is to help, and is instead being used to harm and to hinder,
or to push an agenda.
exactly.
Right? You know, if you've got a therapist that wants to blame the man for everything, what is their goal then? If it's a relationship situation, is the therapist's goal to break up the relationship? You got to wonder, right? Because the worst thing you can do is pile all the blame on one and turn the other into a saint, because that's not going to accomplish anything. Relationships are always 50-50, right? Now, there's degrees of within the relationship on various things, but it's two people. So by definition, it's 50-50.
It takes two to tango. You
It's
can't
do
do it on your own.
Country Born over on Instagram said I was called sexist by a therapist. That has no place in there, right? In my opinion, I'm sure some therapists out there could find a reason to justify it. I can't think of one now, and I probably never could. All that does is, oh, we got a little heart thingy. That was cool. A just sent a hand heart. That is awesome. Thank you. Couple other shout outs. Big Verification sent Rose, and Jay Smartass sent a rose that I'm sure is meant for you, Lindsay, not me.
I'll message him later and give him my
go.
meme that I have saved for him.
When you look at when a therapist is, like somebody else mentioned, they were insulted by their therapist. I forget the exact wording. I'll see if I can find it. When a therapist is insulting you, that they're outside their job, right? That is not. I'm not saying not holding you accountable. That's fair. Okay, making you, if you're dealing with some issue and they're pushing you and trying to make you take accountability for it, fair game. I have no problem with that. If they're calling you a sexist or you fat, right? You need to lose weight. I mean, there's much more constructive ways to do that. If you let's say if I was a doctor, well, I'm a trainer, right? So if I'm working with someone that needs to lose weight, they come to me and they want to lose weight, I will hold them accountable. I would never say to them, and I don't mean this to you, Lindsay, but I'm just going to use you. Lindsay, you're fat, okay? So let's go work out. No, I would say, hey, what is your goal, Lindsay? Do you want to look better? Okay, blah, blah, blah. And I go through this whole, I call it the 5 whys. They might say to me because I'm fat, but I'm never going to say that to them because that's condescending and putting them down. And if a therapist is doing that, I would get up and leave personally, because that is not a competent therapist, in my opinion. I would love to hear if others disagree with that. Again, it's a little bit of semantics, right? Accountability, yes, but insults, no way.
Well, there's a difference between passing blame and accepting guilt. That's my distinction. There's passing the blame or putting the blame on someone, and then there's accepting guilt when and where applicable. There are plenty of things in, say, we're going to use marriage counseling for an example. In my marriage, that it's not perfect, because no marriage is.
But no marriage is. Right.
No marriage is. But I am not interested in being told that I am guiltless, because I know I'm not. If for no other reason than, according to the marriage license we signed, this is humor, by the way, it says on the very bottom, I agree to annoy this person for the rest of my life. I picked that one.
That's fair though.
So, I mean, I know there's things that I do that I bug the absolute crap out of him, and he kind of makes a funny face when he gets not mad, but kind of annoyed mad. He looks like an angry bulldog, and it's adorable. Um, I, on the other hand, look like a mad hamster because he's much taller than me. So I'm like, and he's like, there,
Or a
you're
mad
adorable.
squirrel.
Um, but
There's a bushy tail joke in there somewhere.
I'm
Well,
sure there's lots of jokes to be had in there. But because no two people are perfect, and therefore no marriage can be perfect because a marriage is two people. Um,
and I'd
and
argue, why would you want a perfect marriage? That would be boring as
it would
hell.
be boring as hell if we didn't have things to fight over. Sometimes Eric likes to argue, so he will sometimes pick stupid things. When we were dating, he convinced me he was a bug. We had a 2 hour long. He goes, "I'm a bug." I'm like, "No, you're not." And it was a fun little argument that we had.
And why I like him. I like it.
But I think in many cases, it comes back to the thing that we're always saying, or that I'm always saying, misery loves company.
Mhm.
So, uh, women go into therapy, especially when it's couples therapy of some kind, or relationship therapy, and they're miserable, and they're not actually interested in being unmiserable. They might claim it, but they're not willing to do. You see it, actions speak louder than words. They keep saying, "I'm miserable,
Mhm.
I'm miserable, I'm miserable, I'm miserable," and I know this from experience because I was miserable for a very long time. I had a very, very bad mental health crisis where I almost, or I didn't, where I was worried where if I wanted to go to sleep, I would be fine if I never actually woke up. And, but I didn't want to be miserable. So I had to do the legwork to look inwards and find out why I am constantly miserable, because it's not my husband's job to make me happy. It is happiness in life or a relationship or anything is never someone else's responsibility. It's your responsibility. So like I see marriage advice all the time, and it bugs the crap out of me. They'll say, find someone that makes you happy. No, because if you put your happiness on someone else, you'll never be happy. You'll be miserable for the rest of your life.
They can never make
They
you
can
happy.
never do that. You make yourself happy and then go find someone to be happy
Mhm.
with. And you have to do the legwork to look inwards to make yourself well. And in many cases, you can use the analogy of people who want to lose weight. They want desperately to look a certain way and have this lifestyle, but they have these horrible eating habits, or their lazy habits, bad habits that they have become comfortable with,
Mhm.
and telling them, okay, if you want this result, you're going to have to change your lifestyle and your diet. And in many cases, they dig their heels in and they refuse to admit that they want some magic pill that will suddenly solve all their problems. They're not willing to do the work and admit that their behaviors or their actions are contributing to their misery. And this is the same thing in a lot of therapy that I see, is that women in general aren't really looking for uh to get well. They're looking for a magic pill that will make them happy, and it might for a while. But they're treating the symptoms, they're not treating the underlying problem. And then the same problem with men is, especially when they're in like couples therapy, relationship therapy, is that the easiest way to uh again, misery loves company. So she's miserable, so she's going to blame him for everything because she wants him to be miserable too. How dare you not, be as unhappy as I am. Um And in that regard, couples therapy is failing, I think, in even a worse, faster rate than men's therapy alone, because you do still have some good therapists out there. Is that so much of couple therapy or marriage therapy or relationship therapy is a race to the finish line on who can make people equally miserable, and nothing gets
Mhm.
solved.
It's a fair point.
And the
Yeah.
relationship is actually worse off than when it went in, because now you're both miserable and you hate each other.
Yeah. Instead of resolving conflict, they create more. And
Exactly.
I hear that's another thing I hear from guys in particular. In fact, there's many comments across the board saying exactly that, right? It created more issues. By the way, Minaj said, I have a nice shirt. Like my flamingos? I decided to wear flamingos today. I love this shirt. Um, you know, it, I think that's part of the problem with therapy, but I also think I want to kind of shift the focus a little bit, if we may. You know, when we're talking about the men's mental health crisis, well, first of all, I want to throw out to the audience: do you actually think there is one? So, yes or no? Do you think there actually is a men's mental health crisis? Because I have a little bit different take. All right. Do I think there's one? Yes. Do I think it's as bad as people are making it out? No, I do not. And I'll tell you why. Um, for those that are in crisis, it is a monstrous issue. What I am seeing in the last 4 years, really since the pandemic, when men were stuck home alone and figured out, oh, wait, this ain't so bad. I'm a lot happier. I'm a lot healthier. I've got more peace and a lot less stress in my life by not being in a relationship. More and more men are figuring that out. So I don't want to say there's not a crisis. I think it's almost compartmentalized, right? Those that are in crisis, it is extremely serious. But I think there's a good block out there that are finding out that life isn't as bad as they thought. And I know it's a bit controversial, and I hope people are understanding what I mean by that, because I will tell you, and again, it's the internet, so understand that. But I have seen a polarizing shift in the number of guys who've decided to walk away and are finding peace and happiness, and their mental health has improved.
Well, honey,
So, what do you think on that?
I agree. I mean, the way to resolve in like a medical emergency, the way to resolve the emergency is to remove the thing that is causing distress on your body. Just like we're talking about the lifestyle changes, your body is having all this stress, reaction to stress, whether that's gaining weight or whatever. So you find the I'm using that as an example.
Mhm.
Um,
But it's a good example.
you find the cause of the stress, and you remove that from the equation, and everything else goes away. Bill and I were talking about this with maternal gatekeeping the other day. You find the root cause of the symptoms, you remove that, and the symptoms disappear.
Mhm.
Surprise. It's like if you have lung cancer, you get a lung taken out, suddenly everything else is gone because you have removed the point of the stress, you've removed the stressor. So yeah, there's a lot of men out there that are realizing that women are the problem. It's us, me, we're the problem. And
You're saying what I wasn't saying.
I'm the problem with anyway.
Oh, right. Isn't that a Taylor Swifty song
It is,
there?
unfortunately, I know many of the words to her songs not by choice, but because
Wow. I
radio,
actually knew one.
the
I don't
radio
know her music.
shut up. But yes, and someone else asked in one of the other comments, is there a men's loneliness epidemic? And I say no. There is,
That one
however,
no, there isn't.
a women's loneliness epidemic,
Mhm.
as in where have all the good men gone? And because women like to pretend that men, in other words, women can't find good men, or they're not looking in the right places for good men, the ones they find acceptable. And because they can't find what they're looking for, they assume that the men are just without them bereft, and oh my god, I can't find a good woman, and where have all the good women gone? And if I'm missing out and I can't find a good guy, the guys must also be equally uh destitute, so they must be lonely too. And I'm like, no honey, they're avoiding you like the plague for a reason, and that's why.
Well, like Jesse said, I think the men's mental health crisis is a result of intentional destruction of men. Bingo, right? So the crisis that exists, as I see it, and I have some knowledge on it, but I'm certainly not an expert. The crisis that I see existing, where it's really serious, is largely a result of society's blaming men for everything, right? And I talk about it all the time in my videos. It is drilled into men from literally from the day they're born until the day they die that there's something wrong with them. They're to blame for everything. They're lesser, they're inferior, all that. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't hear it, and I would bet every single guy out here watching this and listening in would agree with me. In some manner of speaking, you hear that every single day. There are unfortunately, many men that get broken by that, right? That is the men's mental health crisis, right? That's what I believe it is. What, to your point though, Lindsay, what most people perceive it as is men are walking away from dating and the quote unquote loneliness epidemic. That's the men's mental health crisis. No, I don't agree that, because I don't think that's the case. There are some serious issues that men have with lack of mental health services, and specifically on things like PTSD and that. But we're talking about two different things, but yet that was the whole point I was trying to make, is they want to lump it under men are just lonely, and that's creating all the problem. That's not the case.
Well, the irony is, and I've had this conversation with a couple of women over on Twitter. I actually finally had my first long conversation, Dan. You would have been proud of me. And it all boiled down to, it was like, okay, well, if a woman decides that she doesn't want to date, other women champion her because she knows her worth, she knows her values. She's not going to
She's a
settle.
4B.
She's not going to settle for less than she deserves. I'm like, okay, now flip it. Why is it true for women and not true for men? And it inevitably becomes, I stumped her because she spent 2 days to respond to me before she said, I see your point. She actually admitted, I see your point. Because this idea that men aren't single by choice, they're again, there's something wrong with them. They are deficient in some way because they are single, rather than choosing for themselves a choice that promotes their mental and physical well-being. We allow women to make that choice. We applaud them for it. But when men make the same choice, again, there's something, well, why? What's wrong with you? Or is it just that you can't find a woman? No, it's not that I can't find one. It's just that I don't want one. And
Right.
then whenever a woman hears, I don't want you, they do this.
It blows their mind.
It blows their mind that they are
circuit.
not wanted. It's the again, female privilege is being wanted, the entitlement of being desired. And if anyone is told, women told, rejected, anyone who is out there says that men don't handle rejection well, men are, as far as rejection is concerned, there are some men that don't handle rejection well, but they're far and few in between. Men are usually like, okay, and they move on. Women do not handle the word no well at all. They rage, they scream, they cry. What's wrong with you? Why don't you want this? Whatever. And then when they can't change your mind that way, they start insulting you. You're gay, AY, aren't you? Or GAY, sorry. You're this, you're that.
What did you just? I was just like, what?
My brain had a malfunction. Sorry. I told you I only had one cough.
That was good. That was good. Though. I liked
one cough a cuppy today. I have a
sign
that says
puppy today.
I have a sign behind my computer that says that, so I read it and whatever.
Oh, okay,
anyway,
gotcha. I thought it was a slip.
But it was a dadism when I was a kid. My dad would go around saying, I need to have a cough a cuppy, and for the longest time I didn't know what that meant because I was little. But now it's just a humorous dykeism. And
well, you are on a roll now.
For those of you who caught that, that's my maiden name, so I'm not yelling at people. Anyway, moving on. Tell a woman no, and the first thing she gets is aghast, agog, it's surprise. And then it moves through denial and then rage. And very rarely will I see a woman accept no for an answer at face value. They will always try and change your mind. Well, what if I do this? No. What if I do this? No. What about this? No. And when that fails, then comes the rage of, well, you're going to die alone. And because the thought that they're not on this pedestal anymore, that they've lost the privilege of being desired, brings them back down to earth, and it's a rough landing.
But is that why they're trying to change the conversation from the serious part of the men's mental health crisis, which is things like PTSD? I mean, I talked to guys that served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're going through horrific things. That is a crisis. It is a major, major crisis. And I hate our government for the way they treat those guys, right? Or don't treat those guys is probably the better way to say it. That's one thing, but it's being conflagrated into this quote unquote loneliness epidemic, which when you go look at it, that whole theory came out of a magazine or article that was put up on, I think it was Psychology Today,
Psychology
where
Today.
this author, it wasn't even a scientific study, it was his opinion, but it's being taken as gospel. And women repeatedly say, well, there was a study done, it was in Psychology Today. No, it wasn't. It was an opinion piece. Okay. I've done videos on this. But the problem is that they're taking the focus off the actual issues that men are going through, which is the real crisis, and creating this big, huge thing, which is nothing more than them trying to degrade men for not wanting them, to your point.
I think in many cases, it's the idea that women don't want to admit that men have problems too. Some very egregious ones. In the cases of PTSD, PSD, result from, domestic abuse, DV, all the things that the truly egregious things that are wrong. They don't want to admit that. They would rather gaslight men and society into thinking that this loneliness is the reason why all these men are sad.
Yes, exactly.
They'd rather gaslight them or straw man. They've created a straw man argument. We know what is really the crisis is. They have erected a straw man that is the men's loneliness epidemic, because that's something they can dismiss entirely and blame men for, versus the reality is to accept that men are human. Men have as many issues as we do, some very, very bad ones, and that they deserve compassion and empathy in order to handle them. And that you cannot really blame them. You can't blame them for these things that are wrong, because a lot of it is deep psychological scars through not necessarily the fault of the person who has the scars.
Right.
So, to use an analogy, the men's loneliness epidemic can be blamed. Well, it's you. You're the problem. You're not this. You're not that. There's something wrong with you. Versus, say, someone who has come back from war and has suffered burns or was blown up or is missing half their face. You can't really blame that condition on them.
Right.
You really can't. And it has become ingrained in our society that the first step is to blame the man. So when that step is removed, when you can't do that anymore, women don't know how to, and society in general, this is including men who have been trained by society, a gynocentric society. When you remove the step one is, we'll blame men. Everyone knows that. We always have to blame men. Well, you can't in this case. He has, PTSD. He is horrifically burned and scarred, serving his country for your benefit. How are you going to blame that on him? Men are lonely. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah, it's so they can't attack a war veteran who's gone through God knows what, right? Because then it's going to blow back on them for doing that. But it's very easy for them to attack a man. There isn't an hour. I was going to say a day that goes by. There isn't an hour, probably not a minute that goes by that I don't have some woman in my comments on one of my videos saying you're a sad, bitter, lonely old man because you can't get laid and you can't get a date and blah, blah, blah. The fact that I'm happily married, apparently they don't know that, right? And there was one yesterday that had this whole narrative she made up. And I'm like, boy, she's got an active fantasy life, right? Never met me before, watched one video, which, by the way, happened to be on the men's mental health crisis, right? And talking about what men are going through and why it's causing them to walk away from everything, right? Because this is the other intending to, I kind of created a great segue here. I think that this talk of the men's mental health crisis and the shifting of where the focus should be, which is on the veterans and all that, over to, well, men are just lonely because they can't get laid and all that. is creating the men walking away, right? You call it MGTOW or whatever you want, which has been around for a while, but it has exploded in the last 3 to 4 years. Again, I go back to COVID was a game changer for men because we were all trapped in our houses for months at a time. And men were like, damn, my life's pretty damn good. I can call up Domino's and get a pizza, play my video games, hang out with my bros, and I got no stress. I'm happy, you know. And I think what's happening with all this is that shift in dynamics is panicking women also because they got no leverage now because, you know, they got one thing to offer. We know what that is. And
Oh,
men are,
okay, bye. And
yeah,
they're like,
and men are like,
uh,
yeah, okay, you know. One or two, there's plenty of people out trying to rack their body count up. It's not that hard to find one, right? Um, and that's the thing, right? This is all coming into play, but it's shifting the focus of everything, right? So we've now lost sight of the actual problem. Like there is a legit men's mental health crisis in the sense that there's no help for them.
and I think it also plays into the fact that we've shifted the focus. So then when a therapist actually meets one of these guys who is in crisis, they're a war veteran or they have been horrifically,
They don't know what to do with them.
systematically, they don't know what to do with them.
They don't.
And that is contributing to the no help because all of the help is geared towards telling men they're the problem. That's what they've been trained to do. So when they actually meet someone who's in crisis, who actually needs the work done, they don't know what to do with that. They're like, uh, well, and it just becomes, well, sorry, I can't help you. And it's like taking, say, a nurse in a clinic in like a itty bitty little, because you know I love my analogies, itty bitty little country town that they don't see a lot, and then putting them in like a trauma center in New York City. They're not going to know what to do if they have, you know, a drive-by shooting or a 20 car pileup with, you know, or a bridge collapses and there's people trapped. They're not going to know what to do with that. Or another better example, another better analogy would take that small town nurse and drop them dead centered ground zero on 9/11 and tell them to be a crisis nurse on the ground. They wouldn't know what to do. They would freeze. And that's what's happening. So because we have shifted the narrative through the straw man and gaslighting to this is the problem, when the actual people who are in crisis and do need it come forward, they're met with small town therapists who have no idea,
No clue what to do.
no clue what to do with an actual legitimate problem.
Which brings up another point. Just quick shout outs to Jay for the tiny Diney, Vexen Primus for the heart, Hank, my buddy Hank. Hey bud. Rose, send us a rose, lightning bolt chili, Armin, send us a rose, and Hank sent an ice cream cone. I'm going to throw out another thing. So one of the things I've often talked about in my videos is the men unaliving themselves, right? Which, depending on which report you looked at, is somewhere between 90 and 135 a day, right? There's different levels and all that. I just put it as more than 100 because I think that's a fair number, which is an absolute crisis, right? You know, let that sink in for a moment. It is what, June 19th? That's 1,900 men this month alone. And we're talking just the US. Worldwide, it's a much higher number, have unalived themselves. People will talk about that. Women will make fun of it, right? I've meant women literally make fun of that. But we don't get to the subcontext underneath it, which is what the hell is now they doing to us? They're saying we're inactive on TikTok. Are you kidding me? I'm literally talking. Oh, dear God. Now I lost my train.
Exhibit A.
Yeah. So, I know.
Not even allowed to talk about it.
Right. So, you know, let's just use a round number of 100 men are unaliving themselves. When you look at the data underneath it, 40 to 50 of them are directly related to divorce and family court. Right? directly related. The other 50, there could be some fall into that aren't being counted in that. Well, let's just say it's 50 to make it easy. Half of all unalivings due to family court and divorce. That's a mental health crisis per se. That is a, I don't know what word I want to use here that won't get us past.
I would call it more. I would call it more of a assisted unaliving.
Systemic anti-malism. How's that? Right? Is that we've now glorified women getting divorced, dropping men, fathers, taking their kids away from them, beating them until they cannot take it anymore, financially, mentally, emotionally, physically, all of that, and then saying, well, they're unaliving themselves because there's a mental health crisis. Yeah. No, they're unaliving themselves not because it's a mental health crisis in that situation, but because they're dealing with family court and a vindictive mother, right? That's why I say there is a mental health crisis, but it's not what everybody thinks it is. Take away the issues in family court, you'd save 50 men's lives a day, every day. Let that sink in.
I think it's absolutely horrific that that's not being acknowledged. I can't tell you how many times I've had women who sit there and say, well, why is he upset? And I'm like, because he can't see his kids. How would you feel if you couldn't see your kids? Well, that's different. How? Because you gave birth to them? That's not a good excuse, because I know plenty of mothers who have given birth who are not, I mean, they're biological mothers, but they're not moms. They're not good parents. They could care less about their kids. So the act of having given birth does not make you a better parent or give you a better connection to your children. And if you would hate to be separated from your kids, what makes you think that by virtue of being male, that is somehow lessened? No.
But that's how they think.
But that's how they think.
And it blows my mind. And when you point it out to them, they cannot make the connection. They just can't do it. Because it's been so ingrained to them that moms are perfect and dads are deadbeats.
Or the way that the media portrays fathers is this: they can't wait to get away from their kids. Or why is he spending all this time? I had a conversation with another lady who's complaining that her husband is never home. But I see her, and this was on Instagram, but I've seen her Instagram page, and all of the things that she posts do not come cheap. And she doesn't work. So I'm like, he's probably at work paying for all of your 6 million Stanley Cups and your little Stanley Cup holder bag, which I looked up because I was curious. Cost like $250 for something to hold your water bottle in. And I'm like, and you have 8 of these. So, and you don't work. So, and he was not, he worked in construction or something. So he doesn't he's not like a doctor or a lawyer who makes a lot of money. He's out working so damn hard to afford your lifestyle because you're living above your means. And it does not compute to them that time is money. And if you want all these nice things, someone has to pay for them, because it might work with your husband smiling and promising favors in order to get something. But if you were to try to take that to a bank, the teller would laugh at you. No.
Really?
Or try and take that as currency to a Walmart or a Target. You'd be laughed out of the store. So it only works that way with your husband or your men in your life. But this idea that, well, he's never home. He doesn't want to come home to avoid, he's avoiding us. No, he's paying for all your stuff.
Right. But now think about what she's probably saying to him in private. If she's saying that
online,
publicly,
yeah.
God knows what she's saying to that poor man, right? So then again, let's say, God forbid, he unalives himself. It's not family court that did it. It's that she drove him to it. But we don't want to have that conversation, right?
Well, we don't want to talk about mental abuse, emotional abuse that would drive someone to believe that they just want it to end. They want it to stop. So in many cases, you'll hear trafficking victims that are on, say, trial for unaliving. They've been horrifically abused, and they unalive not because they had really malicious intent. It's because they just wanted it to stop. They
Yeah.
just wanted it to
It's
stop.
just,
This is no different than those people, but they're turning the pew pew on themselves rather than their abuser. So if you're being systematically, psychologically tortured, abused horrifically over day in and day out, we can't really be surprised when that yields a result like the male unaliving rate. But
Exactly.
we are unwilling, at least as women, again, we are unwilling to accept the part we are playing in orchestrating this tragedy. We want to have men be the sole culprit in, like, well, it's their fault, they're doing it to themselves, but they're not. Happy people don't unalive. And if it were, so something's making them unhappy. And we need to listen to them when they tell us what is making them unhappy, because that's another problem we have is women in general and more recently have the problem of they listen to respond. They're not listening to understand, comprehend, or actually absorb information. They're waiting for the comeback. They're almost like they don't even hear what the man is saying. They're just waiting for him to stop talking so they can get to the next point, which may or may not have any relevancy to whatever he just said. And so they're telling us why they're unhappy. Family court. She's making my life miserable. And while it is not someone else's job to make your life happy, it is absolutely someone else has the capability to make your life miserable. We acknowledge that cyberbullying and bullying in general is detrimental to, like, teenagers' health. We don't understand that once you age up, the bullying doesn't stop. Now the person bullying you is your wife. Just because she's your wife doesn't mean that she's not bullying you. Just
right.
just because they're your spouse and they are you, that doesn't mean that they didn't are you. R is R regardless of who the relationship to your person that does it. So the person bullying you is your wife. That's still bullying. And if it had a psychological impact on a teenager, it's still going to have a psychological impact even as an adult, especially if it has continued for long periods of time.
In some cases, decades. It's a tough subject to talk about because there's so many variables to it. But rather than have an honest conversation, which is what we're trying to do, they want to bury it all, right? It's let's find a way to blame the victim. Let's find a way to attack the men. And it's women, it's society in general. It's the mental health profession doing it, right? Well, it's just because they're lonely. They can't get laid. God, the number. I mean, they have no problem. I'll throw another one at you. Now, it doesn't bother me, but they love to body shame me. Good Lord, the number of times a day I get told I'm bald. Like, apparently, I don't know it, Lindsay. And yeah, there's a little going off the top, but I shave my head. But they think that somehow it's okay to say that to me. But if I were to insult them on their body, well, then I'm a bully. Well, okay. Where I want to go with it though is I'm strong enough. I laugh about it. I do. I just freaking find it. Yeah, Hank, I'm bald. I knew. Who knew, right? They think this is some sort of insult that's going to hurt me. And I just laugh at them and go, baldness is genetic. I can't control my genes. But oh, by the way, your hair is perfectly blonde or brunette or red or whatever color it is, or blue or green, but yet you're 60 years old. Why are you dyeing your hair and hiding the gray hair that you probably have? That's okay though. We're going to cheer that on. But if a man is bald, there's something wrong with him. When some men hear that, it's body shaming, right? I laugh about it. Most guys probably, like they are in the comments right now, are laughing about it. But there are guys out there that do take it to heart very seriously.
Especially
And unfortunately, Go ahead.
especially if it's something that they're self-conscious about. It's the same way that uh I get told all the time, one, I need to put on makeup because he's never going to pick me without it. And I was like, actually, funny story. Joke's on you. My husband prefers my face without any makeup.
Oh,
And
by the
I've
way,
managed,
most guys prefer that look. They hate the made up look, just so you know.
and I'm sorry that my eyebrows could not cut glass, but that just looks entirely. I've watched tutorials on how to do that, just not because I wanted to do it, but because one, I wanted to see how it was done because I'm like, that's witchcraft. Um, but the amount of time it takes to do a full face of Kim Kardashian makeup is like 3 hours. I'm like, I don't have that kind of time every day.
Who
Um,
who has
who-
the and to
and then
accomplish what? Did you, by the way, not to interrupt you, but you see the guy who divorced his wife after 2 days because he had never seen her without her makeup on, and he finally got to see her without it. Had them
no,
old. Yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, but that was too good
and
not
then
to put in there.
the other one women always get me on is because I have no chest. I'm a not so proud member of the itty bitty titty committee, and I always get told that, well, they're not going to like you, and I was like, well, again, I've managed to keep the same man entertained for 20 plus years now, so I don't really care about everybody else. I don't, but it's ironic that women jump to doing that to other women in the same vein that they do to other men.
Exactly. Yeah.
And usually when Dan and I have tried to hold someone accountable, they immediately jump to I'm insulted, so I'm going to insult you again. And it's like, well, first of all, in order to insult me, I have to first care about your opinion, and I don't. So
Mhm.
there's that. But Dan and I are different. There are a lot of people out there, particularly young men and young women, but young men in particular, who have not had time to build up that thick skin. So it'll hurt them or impact them differently than it would, someone who's had a little bit of time to build up a little bit of resistance. And that's dangerous.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. For those who think that it's okay to body shame in that way, I'm talking to the ladies in particular. Let's use myself as an example, right? I've shared before, I was abused many years ago, right? I was R'd by a 35-year-old woman, and then my first marriage was extremely abusive. Let's say for the sake, it did not occur to this, but let's say for the sake of the argument that one of the weapons my abuser used was my baldness to degrade me, to humiliate me every chance she could, day after day, week after week. Now, a couple of years later, along comes, little Miss Susie Q, who decides that she doesn't like what I say, so she's going to relentlessly attack me for being bald, basically supporting my abuser. Would you consider that okay? Because I actually threw that argument at one of them, and she immediately backed down, to her credit, right? But most of the time, if you throw that argument at them, they just double down on it. The other one I've used before, a little over a year ago, I had precancerous lesions, right, that had to be removed. So when they did it, it still hasn't grown back. They had to freeze off the stuff. I lost half my eyebrow. It still hasn't totally grown back. Do you know how many times I get attacked for that? So you're attacking someone who I didn't have cancer, but it was precancerous. It could have turned into cancer. And I always say to those women, I'm wondering, do you stand outside the breast cancer treatment clinics and make fun of the women who've lost their hair or lost their eyebrows or who are going through cancer treatments? Because you probably apparently have no problem doing it to me, and you don't know anything about me. And they'll double. What kills me, some will back down, but most of them will double down on it.
So
And
I got
and an unhealthy man, mental, it's struggling, that could push him over the edge.
So I got in a bit of trouble about a month ago because I told a woman that she was absolutely hideous, and I didn't mean her looks because I hadn't actually seen a picture of her. So this was just in comments. I said, "You are absolutely a hideous human being." She goes, "You're body shaming." I said, "I didn't say anything about your body. I meant your personality. You could be the most beautiful woman, virtual Venus in appearance. I would still say that you're a hideous human because beauty is only skin deep." And um that's the only ever time I've ever used ugly because, again, eye of the beholder. If I was taught by both my mom and my dad that if they can't change it, a person can't change it in 5 minutes, don't comment on it. Meaning, like, your shirt's on backwards, your shoes untied, your hair sticking up, and something that was unintentional. Uh,
Well, I like that one.
and you don't need to comment on it because trust me, if it's something big and glaring, I bet you they know. I bet you they're aware,
Yeah.
and bringing it to attention to it as if they don't know is not helpful because you never know what that person is going through. Maybe, in one case I saw this happen in real life. There was a very large woman who was someone commented on it, and she burst into tears because she had just had gastric bypass, and she'd already lost a whole bunch of weight, and for someone to still call her huge, even though she's done all this work, was just kind of like a setback. And I remember thinking to myself, I was too far away to say anything, but it's like, why would you do that? What possessed you to think that you were being helpful? Because that's another thing that I'll see a lot of women do. Is like, I thought I was being helpful. No, you were being mean, and you're trying to disguise it as help.
Yeah, well, I mean, you kind of trigger. Somebody Matt put in the comments, it'd be like making fun of somebody's mastectomy, right? And to go to your point, being part of a certain club, I'm not going to repeat it. What if that was the case for you, right? Where, God forbid, you had a double mastectomy, and thus were, I don't know how to phrase this politely.
Roses are red, plums are black. Why is my
You
chest
got
as
it.
flat as my back?
There you go. I'll let you do it. But yet they don't think about that, right? So they could attack you about that particular physical characteristic when in reality you'd had a double mastectomy at, say, 20 years old, because there are women out there that have had that. I don't see guys doing that. Are there some that do? Absolutely. And I would call their ass out 100 times out of 100 if they did it. Women do it, and then they cheer each other on for doing it. And again, it goes back to, they do it to men constantly. And they cheer it on. I'll give you another example. This is way out of left field.
One quick, because I can't respond to comments on YouTube. Yes, Jameson, I have kids, 2 of them, boys, both boys.
Oh, I just saw that one pop up.
8 and 10.
That must be laggy.
Continue. Sorry.
No, I lost my interest. Oh, I know I was going to go. So about, was it a month ago, there was that whole inventing Elizabeth thing on TikTok, right? So this is this woman that's out there. She made this video on Mother's Day about how or her birthday or whatever it was.
Is this the one that cried making the cake?
And all that. She's got, last I checked, and I hadn't checked in weeks, she had 60 million views on that video. 100% of the females supporting her. Then her ex casually mentioned, he did a little more than casually in a video, that one, she owed over $20,000 in child support, had been several crimes, arrested several times, criminal cases against her, whole thing, right? I'm not going to get into all the details on it. The point I want to make on it is, rather than hold her accountable, the women have created groups for her to support her. They're literally sending her money to support her, and they've gone after the man. Now, I have reached out to the guy because I want him to come on my show because I want to interview him. But I want you to put yourself in that man's position, because now he's getting doxxed. His name has been put out publicly. He's a doctor. They've gone after his practice and all of that. God forbid, I hope this man is strong enough mentally to hold up. But all he did was say, what you're seeing is not reality, trying to help people to understand that this woman is not the saint you think she is. And I don't want to get into all of what she did and all that stuff. But the point I want to make is women wholeheartedly, it's almost universally, are backing her. There are some exceptions. Just go on the comments. Yeah, you are definitely one of them. But more importantly, look how they're attacking the man, and they won't back off him. He just put up another video. And I can see him slipping up here a little bit. It's getting to him. And again, you want to see that's where the mental health crisis is. He's being vilified, and he should be the hero here. He's got 100% custody of his kids, and they're holding it against him.
Well, didn't just recently in our Roma's Army do the same thing to the guy that she accused of being?
Yeah, rather than admit she was wrong,
she doubled down and
sent her group after him.
And sent her group after him. Now, luckily, he's doing okay. I know that because while I didn't reach out to him, Tammy did.
Tammy was on earlier. I saw her pop on.
She popped up in there, but the cosplay group rallied again around him. But Alvarez, case of mistaken identity, this man was getting unaliving threats, and he was getting threatened to be doxxed. Now, it was a little bit more difficult to go after him because I believe he was in a different country than the U.S., so it was a little bit harder. But the fact that they tried, they just jumped, and based on basically a false accusation of a mistaken identity, and they just would not stop, even when it came out that no, he's not who they're talking about.
Yeah, Maggie Lloyd just said, "What about Inquisitor?" From TikTok?
Again, they just
Charlie is another one, right? Good Time Charlie. It's well over a year ago now that this all went down. He's been proven innocent to the point the sheriff got so sick of what was going on against him. Sheriff made a public video saying he's innocent. There's absolutely no way he could do anything that he was accused of, and yet he's still being attacked. That's where the men's mental health crisis is. It's that society has no problem attacking men, even when they're completely innocent. That's my point.
They've been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion, and they want the people that are accused him of have. It's almost like, in order to validate their actions, they have to get rid of the evidence. And that unfortunately means the man in question, because he can't fight back. But we have a couple minutes left, so want to get to some questions.
Jameson just asked, can you please elaborate on that case, Dan? Which case, Jameson? Good Time Charlie or Inquisitor? Because I want to make sure I can elaborate on both, but we don't have a ton of time. Yeah, go ahead, Lindsay, with what you had.
Well, I was just going to say questions. I can take... You can see TikTok better than I can see.
I'll do TikTok. You go first.
Insult. People who are don't have emotion. Some Maggie said that people who result to insults don't have enough emotional regulation or vocabulary to actually continue a conversation. That's usually true. There are also the people who result immediately to insults are usually very insecure themselves, because they are turning what would hurt them, and because that's what would hurt them. So they're like, well, it would hurt me. It would hurt these other people. And what's hilarious is when it doesn't, they froth at the mouth, their eyes cross, and it's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah. So Jameson was asking the one most recently. I'm going to guess you mean Good Time Charlie. I did a whole podcast with Charlie back in January. My advice to you would be to go watch that. Tammy, Manicured Mom, has also done stuff on it. A few other people have. But basically, in a nutshell, Charlie was accused of just absolutely heinous crimes by a very well-known, not just TikTok influencer, but a Discovery Channel personality, who ultimately was found to be completely lying. The allegations have been proven to be false beyond, forget reasonable doubt, beyond any doubt, to the point she's been charged for it. And despite all that, and like I said, the sheriff literally making a public video saying all of this is untrue, he's still being attacked, and viciously at times. To be fair, some people have come to his defense, not just me, but many, many people have. But go check out the podcast for more information on that. It's a sad story, a scary story. And last I knew, I haven't talked to Charlie in probably a month or so. I should reach out to him again, because I do check in with him. He's doing okay, but he's still struggling, and will be for the rest of his life. So that's that one. I just saw a question, and then TikTok advanced.
Well,
Uh,
I'm going back through it, and someone else made a comment that Simple Man 34 said most narcissists don't want to take responsibility. Would you not agree? Yes and no. The word narcissist is overused. There are very few real, true narcissists, just like there are very few real sociopaths or psychopaths. There are many people who have narcissistic qualities or who are very self centered. Self centeredness is an epidemic, but it's not the same as true narcissism. And people who are very self centered, yes, people who are very self centered have a very difficult time, ironically, turning inwards to look at the self. In other words, they think they are the sun and everything else revolves around them. And so if there's a problem, they are, like I said, ironically, do not turn inwards. They turn outwards. Because it's never anyone else's wrong, because in their self-centered view, they're perfect. They're wonderful. Why would anything be wrong with me? It must be someone else that has a problem with me, and that's why they're reacting. And if their problem is me, well, that's their problem. It's not mine. When in many cases, no, they have a problem with you, and it's a very well-earned problem. Like I actually said this to a woman once who said, well, I'm love, I do this and I do charity and Jesus loves me. To go, okay, he loves you, but I think you're an asshole. She did not. She's like, what?
ouch, babe. You owned her butt. Maggie said, I'm ready to join the fight for men. I've watched my brother for the past 3 years lose literally everything. He's still being attacked. How do I join? Lindsay, how would you say, as a woman, prepare Maggie for what's to come if she decides to speak out on her brother's issues? But how could Maggie best help her brother by speaking out for his issues? What would you say to her?
First of all, ask your brother if he's okay with you speaking out on his issues. Get his consent first. If he's okay with it, then if you do speak out, never say any information that can be used to trace him back, because someone will go after him. When I do my advocacy online, Mr. Squirrely is never in any of my videos for his privacy. I never show my children online. I'll talk about them, but I will never have them appear in any of my videos.
And they do exist because I've seen all three, both the hubby and the children.
And the dog. You can see one of the
And the
dogs.
dogs. Yep.
Right,
Two dogs. Right? That's not Sansa, though, right?
No, that's not Sansa. That's Chloe. Chloe. She perked up. She's like, I heard my name. Yes, I'm talking about you. As soon as you have his confirmation that he's okay with you talking about it, talk in generalized terms. Try not to keep the conversation too specific to just him. If you can broaden out to where it's more generalized conversation, then you're more likely to get feedback from guys or gals who are going through similar things, which of course you can then pass on to your brother. Because one of the things that men have a real problem with is being told, they always say, it's not just me. I thought it was just me. Thought it for sure it was just me. I didn't know that other people were going through this. So if you can keep things not like super generalized, but just generalized enough so that guys who are going through similar things can chime in with advice. This worked, that this didn't work. That would be my two biggest pieces of advice. But consent first. Make sure he's okay with you talking about his stuff to a grander audience, because some guys just aren't.
And I encourage you to get him to speak out and share his story. The number one thing I would say to all the guys listening, and I know many of you have shared them in the comments, the more of us that speak out, the more of us that share our stories, the more of us that stand up and say, you know, these double standards that are out there aren't reality, the sooner things will change. You know, I do it. Lindsay does it on behalf of men. There are a lot of us out here, but we need more help. The bottom line is we are outnumbered 1,000 to 1 on social media, in the general media, society in general. You know, for every one of Lindsay or I, there are literally 1,000 on the other side just hammering away. And they are powerful. They are well organized. And the only way we're going to win or even get parity is if we all start speaking up, sharing our stories. Doesn't mean we have to resort to doing what they do, demeaning people and all that stuff. That's not going to solve anything. But speaking up, share your stories. But understand, you're going to get blasted. I get blasted every day. I know Lindsay does too. I argue that Lindsay gets it worse than I do most days, because she unfortunately would happen to be born female and is a traitor, right? Because they call you a traitor all the time. And it's absolutely absurd. But the more we speak out, the sooner things are going to change. A couple more quick shout outs. Big J Bear. I like that name. Sent a heart. Hank sent another rose. Guys, we're going to wrap things up. Lindsay, any final thoughts before we do?
No, I think this was a pretty good one.
Yeah, this was really good. Guys, we are live every Wednesday from 4 to 5:30. Come join us. We do different topics each week. No, we don't know what we're talking about next week. We'll figure something out. And I do a podcast that goes up every Sunday at 11. I haven't talked about it yet today. But for the next 3 weeks, 1 went up last week with Father X. The next 3 weeks are the continuation of it. We did it's ultimately a 5-part series on family court, what men go through, what they have to do to navigate their way through it, how they can get custody, all that stuff. It started out as a 2-hour podcast and turned into 10. So check out that. And hey, make sure you give us the like, subscribes, follow Lindsay on all her various social medias by going to, give me your handle.
Squirrel Girl 1988 or Squirrel Girl 1088. I'm really only 1088 as my backup for TikTok because sometimes I get shut down because again, I'm a traitor. But it's Squirrel Girl 88, Squirrel Girl 1988 on everything else. On Twitter, YouTube, here on TikTok, all of it. Instagram.
The IG. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Y'all have a great week, and we'll catch you next time.
See y'all next time. Bye.